Listen. These aren't just numbers. They represent lives lost and families shattered, and it's high time our city and state governments took responsibility for their negligence. It's time for accountability. It's time for action, and it's time for change. Ooh, ooh, that was good. You know what? Let's go ahead. Let's let's go ahead and get this started. Let's do it live, or whatever Bill O'Reilly said that one time.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Grand Failure Beyond the Streets podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Massey. For those who haven't met me yet, I'm a longtime resident of Arizona, having spent most of my childhood and adult life here. I currently call Surprise, Arizona home, where I've been for about 2 years now. You may know me from my online advocacy work addressing the traffic issues in the Northwest region of Surprise. I initiated a petition on change.org and created a website, thegrandfailure.site, that's thegrandfailure.site, to raise awareness about the ongoing traffic crisis near Grand Avenue, also known as the US 60, near the Loop 303 highway and surrounding areas. Like many of you, I'm a concerned private citizen, not affiliated with any government entity. The recent worsening of traffic conditions, especially in the last 6 to 12 months, has raised significant safety concerns for our community. Personally, I align with the Libertarian Party, valuing the freedoms outlined in our nation's governing documents, namely the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I believe in minimal government interference and individual liberties. But let's go ahead and focus on why you're probably here, which is the abysmal state of our roads in Northwestern Surprise and the failures in addressing these issues. So let me go ahead and set the scene for you all here. And in order to do that, we do need to rewind the clock about 20 to 25 years back to the year 2000. Picture Surprise back then. It was a small town, practically rural. Most of what you see today simply didn't exist. To put it in perspective, Surprise had a population of around 30,800 people back then, with about 16,300 homes to accommodate them. Fast forward a little bit closer to present day Surprise, circa 2010. According to the census, our city's population had exploded to 117,500 people with around 52,600 homes. Now, for those math whizzes out there, you may notice a trend. We're about 2 people per house at this point. But wait, there's more. Between 2000 and 2010, the reality is that our population more than tripled. That's a staggering growth rate. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the next decade, which is from 2010 to 2020. Surprise's population soared to approximately 143,200 people, with around 58,900 homes. Crunching those numbers again, that brings us closer to about 3 people per home. In plain English, Surprise's population grew a jaw dropping 464% from 2000 to 2020. But here's really where it gets even juicier. The Maricopa Association of Governments, or MAG, estimates that by 2030, Surprise is going to be home to about 215,000 people. If we stick with that same 3 people per home ratio, that would mean that we would be looking at potentially around 88,400 homes. Now, that's a lot of rooftops. Now, why does all of this matter when we're talking about our dreadful roads? Well, Surprise, much like most of Arizona, is a car centric paradise, if you will. If you want to go anywhere, a grocery store, work, school, you name it, you need a car. And guess what? All of those cars hit the roads, turning them into parking lots. What's even more baffling is that while residential developers have been in a frenzy building new homes left and right, the infrastructure simply hasn't kept pace. It's like trying to fill a glass of water using a fire hydrant. And let's not forget about our kiddos. With families moving in, schools in the area get packed, which forces the district to either build more schools or play the musical chairs game with zoning. And how do they plan to shuttle those kids when everything's rezoned? Buses. Big old buses navigating these nightmarish roads. So, to picture this a little bit better, big buses carrying the most precious cargo in the world, arguably, are children, braving these treacherous roads twice a day, every weekday or every school day, while the rest of us are also either stuck in our morning or afternoon commutes. It's a recipe for chaos, and trust me, we're really just scratching the surface here, but I think you get the gist. Now that I've set the stage, let's dive a little bit deeper and unravel the mysteries behind our utterly abysmal and awful streets. According to conversations I've had with individuals within the city of Surprise government, they seem to have a recurring phrase, and that looks something like,
Oh, we saw that coming. We've seen this coming.
right? And apparently, they're indicating that they have been aware of all of these impending issues since as far back as 2014. Now, call me skeptical, but that's a whole decade ago. So they've known about this problem or this impending problem for 10 years. And uh, I mean, well, I guess the nicest way for me to put it is to say that their actions haven't quite matched their supposed awareness. Now, as a libertarian, I shouldn't be surprised by government inefficiency. I mean, even Ron Swanson from NBC's Parks and Rec, for those of you who have seen it, consistently joked about it all the time, right? But I digress here. Let's go ahead and talk about our city's peculiar habit when it comes to planning and zoning, shall we? It's like they have a knack for greenlighting projects that'll absolutely flood our streets with cars. Whether it's a new shopping center or a sprawling housing development, they just can't resist. But here's the kicker: they really don't make it easy to track down any of their decision making progress or process. No accessible meeting minutes or voting records. Well, I mean, I guess technically they're accessible, but you have to do tons and tons of digging. It's a very daunting task for even the most technically literate person. So, what I've done is I've taken it upon myself to piece together this puzzle using news articles from the past few years. Starting around 2017, Surprise has seen a pattern. And that pattern is that a developer swoops in with grandiose plans, the residents protest, the city stages its little charade of community meetings and hearings and the like, and then abracadabra, viola, alakazam, whatever word you want to use here, they make some minor tweaks to the plans and they're now all of a sudden good to go. It's like clockwork. And if you need examples, just look at areas like Altamira, Rancho Mercado, Paloma Creek, Pro's apartment. I mean, really, the list goes on and on. And let's not forget about their annexation spree in neighboring communities like Morristown, attempts in Whitman, and even as close to Wickenburg as they possibly can get. Surprise is expanding, and they're expanding fast. And here's what really boggles my mind. While all of this development is happening, there seems to be barely a thought given to infrastructure. While all of this is going on, the Arizona Department of Transportation, or ADOT, is over here busy building freeway exits for a chip plant and funding public transit systems and electric vehicle charging stations. Now, don't get me wrong, those are nice to have, but shouldn't fixing our crumbling roads, or more aptly, non existent roads, be a priority? Those electric vehicle charging stations are really a luxury item and don't necessarily need to be publicly funded. Public transit systems barely occupied enough to even justify running their routes. And speaking of that chip plant, it's a whole saga in and of itself. Tax dollars were used to build freeway exits for a plant that isn't even fully staffed yet. And get this, They're now going to be importing talent from Taiwan because they can't find, quote,
Qualified candidates.
locally. So, where are all of these newly relocated TSMC employees going to be looking for new housing? Yep, surprise. More homes, more cars, and more traffic. It's like watching a circus and the clowns are running the show. So now that we've got the background, let's really dive in here to the far reaching consequences and ripple effect that this lack of planning and the grim reality of our roads fates before our communities were really even built. Recently, as I started delving into the inner workings of our city, I stumbled upon a disturbing revelation regarding transportation improvements, or really, rather, the lack thereof. For those unfamiliar with land development, let me break it down. Whenever a developer decides to build on a piece of land, they're required to pay something called a developer impact fee to the city of Surprise. Those fees are meant to offset the cost of connecting new buildings to city services for things like trash, water, sewage, and most importantly and crucially, roadway. So I'm going to need you guys to sit down if you're not already seated and brace yourself for this absolutely bananas fact I'm about to lay on you. Despite collecting these fees, the city currently allocates exactly $0 per home for road improvements. Zero. Zilch, nada, zero, cero, nothing. It's almost as if they're allergic to investing in our infrastructure. And this isn't even a recent blunder or oversight. It's been the status quo for years. According to insiders, this policy's been in place since at least 2017. So, really, it should be no surprise that neighborhoods like North Copper Canyon and Asante are left with only one or two access points for cars. It's just further testament and further proof that this is really a recipe for gridlock. To put it bluntly, the city seems more interested in building parks or pools or water parks rather than fixing our roads. One city official even had the absolute audacity to claim to me that residents outside of District 1, which is most of Northwest Surprise, where Nick Haney is our current councilman, i.e., the area that is plagued by all of these traffic issues right now, these other residents don't care about the roads because they want parks. I've got news for them. There's a world of difference between wants and legitimate needs.
Hell yeah! That's what I'm talking about.
Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There is a tiny little glimmer of hope on the horizon here. So, in late November, the city enlisted the help of a company called Tischler Buys. They're a consulting firm. They enlisted them to assess land use assumptions and recommend infrastructure improvements. And this little consulting and reporting study that was done could mark a turning point in our city's approach to transportation planning. Let's talk numbers for a second. This Tischler bias study suggests that an average street development impact fee of around $1,400 per single family home across all service areas. They've divided service areas up into three different sections. There's north, south, and west. The area that has the most traffic problems is the west, but for sake of my initial argument here, let's crunch the numbers and let's run it using the $1,400 per home. If we look at those averages that I mentioned or those estimates that I mentioned earlier in the census quotes and kind of factor in that we're about 50% of the way there almost to the 2030 estimates, $1,400 per home would equate from 2020 to about where we are in 2024 to about $20 million potentially in funds collected for street and roadway improvements. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg here, folks. If we focus a little bit more specifically on the west service area, which is A, where the traffic problems are, and B, realistically, where most of the new home construction is truly happening, and apply the recommended street development fees for that area, That recommendation is about $2,300 per home. And if we do a little math, that would put us closer to a staggering $34 million. That's a huge and very substantial sum of money that could have transformed our roads for the better. To put things into perspective, traffic lights alone cost about $1 million each. Take, for instance, the two lights within North Copper Canyon that we are waiting on here at Grand and Deer Valley, and then the other one at Deer Valley and Williams. These are all eagerly awaited by the residents of NCC. Shockingly, neither the city nor the state is funding these lights. Instead, they're being privately funded by Cortland Homes, who's a builder in this area. And the bureaucratic red tape here when I did my digging is nothing short of infuriating. Plans for these lights were submitted by Cortland in April of 2021. Approval was not granted until just this past August or September. So, August or September of 2023. That's 2.5 years of bureaucratic inertia, or really lack thereof, any sort of inertia, for a couple of projects that aren't even government funded. The consequences of this negligence are far from trivial. The lack of proper infrastructure has led to a surge of accidents and public safety concerns. From January 2017 to December of 2021, ADOT did a feasibility study for the area, and they calculated that there were a staggering 334 accidents in this study area, with only 50 of them being on the Loop 303 close by, and the other 284 of them occurring on Grand Avenue alone. And that's just accidents reported to ADOT within ADOT's jurisdiction. If we look at the City of Surprise statistics, looking at 2022 versus 2023, that paints an even more grim picture. Hit and run accidents are up by nearly 10% at 9.8%. Those hit and runs are up. You've got property damage, so cars being broken, totaled, whatever, right? Those accidents are up by 5.2%. Fatalities in an accident are up by a absolutely skyrocketing 300%. You heard that right. Fatalities up by 300%. These aren't just numbers. These represent lives lost, families shattered, and really, it is more than high time for our city and our state governments to take responsibility for their negligence. It is time for accountability, it is time for action, and it is 110% time for change. So, I want to take a moment to shift from how we got here and shift the focus to the future of our neighborhoods. While, as much as I hate to admit it, ADOT deserves credit for moving forward with the part of the restriping project in the westbound lanes between the 303 and 163rd Avenue. It is imperative that they expedite the remaining timelines for all of the remaining restriping projects. So the eastbound lanes, 303 exits, on and off ramps, things of that sort. And as a community, we must continue to advocate for these crucial improvements that promise to alleviate traffic congestion. And even if it doesn't alleviate it, we've already seen improvements with those westbound lanes. It's gonna help the situation because the equation is very simple. More lanes means more space for cars, which translates to less gridlock in our area. In addition to continuing to keep the pressure on our city and the pressure on ADOT, we need to continue to engage with other relevant entities like MAG and our state governments to address the issue of the I-11 traffic that's on Grand Avenue. The completion of the I-11 freeway would significantly reduce the heavy semi-truck traffic that's plaguing Grand Avenue right now. If the freeway project simply isn't feasible right now, then as much as I dislike government regulation, we need to look at alternative solutions and explore those. Things like implementing restrictions on commercial truck traffic during peak hours and things like that is not uncommon, especially in other states, and probably something that we should look into. To illustrate the impact of commercial traffic on these local roads, consider the scenario, and this may be familiar to some of you. Imagine that you're stuck behind a semi truck at a traffic light, and often these truck drivers are communicating with one another via CB radios, which what they do in this instance is if you have a semi truck or a couple of semi trucks kind of neck and neck sitting at an intersection, say 163rd Avenue, for example, one truck will hold the traffic up in one lane of travel while the others go through, pass through the intersection, and then that other truck moves over. And what happens is this creates a bottleneck. And you probably have sat in a lane of travel where the light has gone green and you've sat through most of the light cycle and you're not moving because somebody hasn't put their foot on the gas. This bottleneck effect is very noticeable along Grand Avenue, right near the 303 interchanges, and it's not an uncommon occurrence. And ultimately, what's really going to fix the issue moving forward is that our neighborhoods require more access points to ease traffic flow. Just as a fire hose needs multiple outlets to prevent bursting, our roads need additional routes to accommodate the growing population. In addition to road signal improvements, widening projects, and the like, I propose the following community driven initiatives that we all need to stand behind and start advocating for change. Now, these initiatives look like um, extending El Mirage Road from the Loop 303 to 147th Avenue, which would connect to Happy Valley Road. From there, you're going to take Happy Valley Road and extend that from 163rd Avenue. It would connect briefly at the top of Pat Tillman in the back of Asante neighborhoods over there and continue Happy Valley across the 60 and connect it all the way through North Copper Canyon over to 195th Avenue. You would want to do a same broadening or extension project for Jomax to move that from 175th Avenue over by Desert Oasis and extend that through to 195th, which is going to provide another east-west route or another, even just another access point to Grand Avenue for folks back off of 163rd. With these new and expanding residential areas around Jomax and 155th Avenue, another item that could help is to extend Dynamite from 163rd over to Dysart. And then for the new developments and new homes that are going in the North Copper Canyon area around 175th and Pinnacle Peak, I propose that they extend 175th Avenue to Norwich or something similar to give those folks towards the northern part of North Copper Canyon another access point out of the neighborhood that's more developed. And then finally, I mentioned 195th Avenue a couple of times. If you take 195th Avenue from Deer Valley Road and you move that and extend that south to connect to Sun Valley Parkway, which really winds up being Bell Road if you go just slightly east from that point, that's going to give yet another access point, allow traffic to move off of the 303 because I can't tell you how frustrating it is to take a surface street from Grand Avenue or to take the 303 from Grand to Bell just to get to some of the shopping and dining places in the area. It's infuriating and it causes just unnecessary backup where a frontage road or something like 195th Avenue would serve that purpose. Now, of course, these are all suggestions just informed by my research, my personal perspectives, and looking to aim or funnel or what have you to address a little bit more constructively these pressing issues for traffic congestion in our neighborhoods. I'm by no means a traffic engineer, and but I do believe that increasing access points is going to significantly improve traffic flow and alleviate bottlenecks. If you've stuck around long enough to listen to this episode, I want to express my sincerest gratitude thank you for investing your time, patience, and attention to this podcasting journey of mine. My goal here is to create a platform and a vehicle for citizens like myself who are passionate about addressing these traffic issues to stay informed and stay engaged. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and recap and then conclude our very first episode of the Grand Failure podcast. So, just to recap here, Surprise has experienced an astounding 464% population growth from 2000 to 2020. However, our infrastructure, and more particularly our roads, have failed to keep pace with this rapid development. This presents a significant public safety concern as our roads are overcrowded and accidents, including fatalities and DUI incidents, are all on the rise. Northwest Surprise has become a ticking time bomb of traffic woes, and the time for action is now. We can't afford to passively wait for the government to take action anymore. If you haven't already, consider signing the petition on change.org and visiting the grandfailure.site to voice your concerns to government officials and agencies and even send them an email. All of the links are directly on the homepage of the site, so it's very easy to locate. Again, that's thegrandfailure.site. Additionally, it's an election year, so getting involved in your local elections or even running for office yourself can make a meaningful difference. The competition for city elections may not be as daunting as it seems, especially when you consider some of our potential candidates' histories. Spoiler alert, a lot of them are out of touch or, how do I put this, full of questionable morals and decisions. Anywho, if you found this episode of value to you, I do encourage you to leave a comment on Spotify or engage with the question down below today's episode. I'm considering adding a catchy name for it, just because I'm a nerd like that, for that little Q&A section related to each episode. So far, I'm thinking things such as episodic enigmas or installment inquiries. I'm going to go ahead and mull it over. If anybody has a suggestion, feel free to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for all of our future episodes of the Grand Failure podcast. This is Rebecca Massey signing off for today. Thank you, everyone.
You're listening to The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets, a podcast about the ongoing public safety crisis in Surprise, Arizona.
The Grand Failure podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by Rebecca Massey. Jonathan Perry is credited with the voiceover and announcement work. Special thanks to Spotify for Podcasters for providing the hosting and distribution platform, and to the Audacity team for their open source software that facilitated the production and editing of this podcast. Graphic design, logos, and artwork for this podcast were created by Rebecca Massey using Canva software. Sound effects and music were provided courtesy of freesound.org, a valuable resource offering royalty-free Community Commons licenses for a variety of soundbites, songs, effects, and more. For additional information and sources referenced in today's episode, please visit the dedicated webpage for the Grand Failure podcast on thegrandfailure.site. Sources for today's episode include the Surprise Independent Newspaper Online, City of Surprise Public Record Requests, reports, council sessions, meeting minutes, and presentations from the Department of Transportation in Arizona, or ADOT, feasibility studies and project web pages, as well as presentations from the Maricopa Association of Governments. A special thank you to the Local Political Action Committee, or PAC, Voice of Surprise, for their partnership on this podcasting endeavor, and my other crusades for a better surprise. Additionally, a heartfelt appreciation to my husband Brian Massey for his unwavering support throughout this project. Thank you all for your time and dedication, and for complete podcast credits, details, additional information, and more, please visit thegrandfailure.site.
Next time on the Grand Failure podcast.
Oh boy, I hope you're ready. Because if not, you better get ready for an eye-opening episode of the Grand Failure podcast. Join me in the next episode where I delve deep into the murky world of local government deceit and unethical practices regarding traffic management. We'll cover everything from shady dealings to blatant lies, and I'll uncover the shocking truth behind why our roads are failing despite the soaring population growth here in Surprise. Join me, your host, Rebecca Massey, as I'll expose the disturbing reality of how our tax dollars are misused and mismanaged, leaving our communities stranded in gridlock. Don't miss this gripping exploration of the hidden agendas and backroom deals that are driving our neighborhoods to the brink and, quite frankly, our local politics too. Tune in the next episode for an inside look at the dark side of traffic management and infrastructure and what we can do to fight back. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay tuned to
The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets.